In this next session, what we would like to do is to explore a new frontier, potentially, in refractive surgery. There's been a lot of sessions on how to revive refractive surgery, which peaked and then sort of went down and is flat, and we're trying to get it to come back. But what we'd like to focus on in this session is really a segment of the refractive surgery market that is essentially unpenetrated by technologies, which is the low myopia segment, which we're saying is -2 and lower.
Now, as many of you probably know, the myopic population is heavily weighted toward the low end of the spectrum. Now, for this presentation, I'm defining low myopia as between -0.5 and -2 diopters. The average myope has about 2 diopters of refractive error, and over half of all myopes, or about 57%, have up to 2 diopters. The numbers are huge, with 47 million American adults between 18 and 65 falling into this low myopia category. Now, within that low myopia group, about half have between -0.5 and -1 diopter, and the other half have between -1 and -2. So even setting aside the lowest end of the spectrum, if you believe that up to -1 is just not addressable surgically, then even within the -1 to -2 group, you still have nearly 30% of all myopes represented. Now, contact lenses are somewhat underpenetrated within the low myopia group. This is contact lens fit data from Bausch & Lomb. Thanks to Cal Roberts for sending us this data. The most common lens powers are between -2 and -4, and the average myopic contact lens wearer has a -3.5 power. About a quarter of all myopic contact lens wearers fall into this low myopia category. And again, the numbers are very large. Over 8 million Americans that wear contact lenses fall into this category. Now, refractive surgery is even more underpenetrated within the low myopia group. Based on a number of sources in the literature, it's estimated that about 4.5 diopters is the mean level of correction for laser vision correction, and only about 10 to 15% of LASIK patients and other refractive patients fall into this low myopia category. So what does all this mean with respect to the growth opportunity for refractive surgery? Well, first, if refractive surgery could penetrate to the same extent that contact lenses do, this low myopia population, this could result in a potential market opportunity 15 to 20% greater than refractive surgery addresses today. Going one step further, if refractive surgery could reach the same proportion of low myopes that we see across the entire myopic population, the refractive surgery opportunity could be twice what it is today.
But to increase the market, to increase refractive surgery penetration into this low myopia group, again, you've got a large group of people that fail out of contact lenses. Are they addressable?
So as a matter of fact, to put it in perspective, it's actually 10x, right? Because there are 38 million wearers of contacts in the United States, 10% drop out every year, that's 3.8 million patients, and we have 700,000 procedures today in the United States. So it's 7 million eyes, right? So at 10x, which could be addressed by other technologies. Just one little comment maybe to address why the market is not growing, which is also inclusive of the low myopia segment. We haven't put also the role of the provider, and whether the provider in the last few years have decided to spend more time in newer cataract technologies and lenses and things versus refractive.
Do you mean Dr. Laurent?
I don't know.
When you said provider?
Yes.
You must have meant doctor.
I meant doctor.
Physician.
I think
physicians.
he meant ECP.
I think he meant healer.
So ECPs have maybe not given the same level of attention to laser refractive correction versus some of the things, the advancements of cataracts in the last few years.
And to build on that, much of what we're talking about was covered. We talked in our breakfast session this morning that Vance Thompson led, and the survey bears this out. There's a number of choke points and barriers in the consumer path to purchase for refractive surgery. So we've touched on 2 of them: very highly entrenched safety and fear barriers. Sometimes there's a great divide between what patients want to hear to get them over the hump versus what they are what the marketing they hear from providers. And then finally, there's another choke point in the United States, at least 85% or more of patients are getting their primary eye care through optometry. So there's a conversation with the optometrists, and I think we can help better educate that process.
If safety is really a big concern and not so much what I would have thought maybe patient motivation, what is PRK the safest, and could that be the best technology?
Well, I mean, obviously, PRK is going to offer the fact that there's no flap, right? So you're not cutting into the cornea. Fine, at least as a flap. I think the haze also has been well controlled lately, and so it's a great modality. But that low myop also is always going to be as well attracted to the wow effect, which is less of a quality of PRK, as we all know. So therefore, I think PRK plays a role for sure. I'm not sure if it can be the catalyst of bringing more people in the low myopes into the category, to be honest with you. But it's obviously has the benefit of no flap, and then also the safety is there.
Cal mentioned comfort. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's the wow effect that I was trying to mention, right? So if you're doing a low myope with a LASIK, is gonna get off the bed and hug you. I'm not sure that would be the same response on the PRK.
Right. I don't know that the data has been well accumulated. However, when I speak to refractive surgeons, and most ophthalmologists, when they want to have refractive surgery, want to have PRK.
How can modern LASIK drive that? Can it drive that?
So go ahead. Well, first, I think we haven't leveraged enough the data that we have, right? So we had the FDA study that was done last year, and I don't think that collectively we are using this proactively enough in order to establish the safety. If there's still some hesitation, as we know, about the fear factor, right? Then we have the data of this amazing field of laser refractive surgery with clinical outcomes that are bar none the best in any surgeries we know, right? What we need to do also is have discipline of not negatively marketing against different modalities. I've seen it when we went from blades to femtos for LASIK, right? And a lot of negative marketing in order to put down one modality versus another. It's good to debate them clinically, but as far as the consumer is concerned, it's not good to try to differentiate or put one down versus the other, right? Because you're not helping addressing that fear factor, you're actually causing it.
I guess one thing for me is it more or less invasive than, how should we think about the SMILE procedure, and could it be more appealing to this patient population?
Well, okay, so I think this is a great question, less invasive. So the public, I think the public clearly understands the concept of less invasive to represent the incision into the body is smaller. It's a small incision. It's not a huge incision, small incision. It's done with fine instruments that are put through small incisions. And in that regard, SMILE fits that definition, because the SMILE incision is, today it's 6 millimeters, internationally it's 2 or 3 millimeters, and that's vastly different than the incision that is a LASIK incision, which is the circumferential length of it is on the order of 25 millimeters. So in the pure aspect of that, it is less invasive. And I think that actually is important for a public perception issue about safety. And so it could, SMILE very well could help cross that threshold into the barriers that patients have regarding safety, even though the safety issues are really mostly unjustified. The safety aspects is mostly unjustified that the public has about it, especially when it relates to contact lenses or whatever. And I think it could help to bridge that gap in being a procedure, just bringing the whole field of refractive surgery to an appreciation about how, the relative value that it provides.
There have been so many rebrandings of LASIK and PRK, epi-LASIK, all these things, and they really haven't worked. The public wasn't fooled. Do you think that they will perceive SMILE as something different?
Well, obviously that has to do with a whole bunch of different things. But the procedure itself is different.
No doubt it's different.
It is a
Will
totally
they-
different procedure.
This time it's different. Will they perceive it as different?
Well, the crystal ball, I hope they would, and it depends on how the message comes across. I agree that if the message comes across as stepping on LASIK or stepping on PRK, then the answer is going to be a muddled picture for the consumer, and they're not going to appreciate that. And it won't grow. So it depends on how the message comes across, how eye care providers market the procedure, how it's perceived. So there's a whole bunch of different variables. It could fall in that category where it's just like an epi-LASIK procedure where it doesn't. But it has the opportunity to cross the bridge.
Yeah, but I worry where the debate's going because you've already predetermined that you're going to sensitize the consumer and the patient about, hey, it's a less invasive thing. I don't know, but how better do we have to get the clinical results in laser refractive in general and LASIK to be confident that we have a safe and effective procedure as far as the consumer is concerned, right? I believe, and the other thing I would say is as well as this, we should work on all the modalities so that they become accessible in terms of skill set among everybody. One of the advantages of LASIK of being longer in the marketplace is that it has crossed that chasm where everybody seems to get that same level of high, visual acuity. That may not be the case with newer modalities, and we need to get there for the benefit of the whole category. But again, to use that to communicate to a patient, hey, I've got a less invasive one now, no. Let's keep it at those meetings here, in my opinion. You don't do a service to try to say, oh, mine's less invasive, because the patient does not know. And my last point will be this. We are now talking to a different population, the millennials. And all the studies we've done at AMO, at Alcon, whether it's primary research, secondary research, show that their decision-making is very different than the population we've been doing. And that they already know that they want it, and they're only looking for the eye care provider to get it to them. So there's no more working up and convincing them of anything. They're already convinced coming in. It's a very different marketing to the millennials.
Could the pixel procedure play in this milieu of -2 or lower? And I think most people saw the Avidra presentation earlier, but we just put a slide in here. Do you want me to just build the slide up for you, Raj? Maybe I'll do that for you.
Sure, I can maybe give a quick overview of Pixel, since many of you may not know too much about it. On the top left, you see just a diagrammatic description of the treatment in the center of the cornea, which is riboflavin, just drops on the eye, and a UV light, no removal of epithelium. And it's flattening the central portion of the cornea, thus flattening it and strengthening it at the same time, but changing the refractive error. So this is something we've learned from keratoconus treatments with cross-linking, that we get a flattening effect in the central portion of the cornea, and so this can have a refractive benefit. So is this something that is applicable to the patient base that we're talking about in low myopes? If you look at the top right, this is a market study that we had done of patients from the UK and the US, and goes through many of the things we were just all talking about. But important points. About 60% of these patients under age 40 who were low myopes had thought about LASIK, but only 12% had come in to see a doctor. And I think that goes to all of the issues we were just discussing. And when asked why, surgery was the primary issue that they didn't like. But if you told them there was a non-invasive option, well over 90% said, yeah, I would consider that. Drops in a light, that makes sense. On the bottom left, you can see one of our studies representative of, or one of the sets of results from our studies that are being done outside the US and demonstrate a refractive error correction of about 1 diopter of myopia. There are now multiple parameters, such as the addition of oxygen being studied in this to be able to increase that effect, but also to be able to refine the treatment effect. And then finally, on the bottom right, is again from that market survey, you can see the key terms that were described as reasons people would not think about surgery on the bottom, such as, again, surgery or cutting, or if they were contact lens users, reasons they didn't like them. It was lack of comfort, irritation, interference with lifestyle. But things that they found attractive about Pixel: non-invasive, non-incisional, strengthens the cornea, non-surgical. So I think this is a treatment that may change the paradigm that we're talking about, because it would allow patients to have a non-invasive approach rather than a surgical approach for low corrections of refractive error.